Valentine's Day was supposed to crown my love story, until I found my future mother-in-law claiming my house with a smirk and a slap. What secret shattered my wedding dreams just weeks before the vows? Betrayal stung, but freedom burned brighter. Dive into this shocking tale and hit subscribe. Help us reach our first 1,000 supporters. 3 weeks before my Valentine's wedding, I thought I'd found my happily ever after. My name's Grace Harper, and back then, I was a 28-year-old Canadian transplant living in Seattle, chasing a dream that felt so close I could taste it. I'd met Liam Carter 3 years earlier in a university lecture hall, his shy smile cutting through the gray of a rainy afternoon. He was a fellow international student, another lost soul from back home, trying to make sense of life in America. We clicked instantly. Coffee dates turned into late-night talks, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. Last spring, under a dripping sky at Gasworks Park, he dropped to one knee and asked me to be his forever. I said yes without a second thought, my heart pounding louder than the rain. We planned the wedding for Valentine's Day. Cheesy, I know, but it felt right. I'd spent months sketching out every detail in my mind: a white lace dress, roses spilling over the tables, and a little house in the suburbs to call our own. That house was my pride and joy. My parents had scraped together every penny to buy it for me as a wedding gift, a cozy 2-bedroom with a porch that caught the morning sun just right. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, a symbol of everything I'd worked for, everything I wanted us to build together. Liam loved it too, or so he said. He'd sit on that porch with me, dreaming out loud about kids and barbecues and lazy Sundays. It was our future, wrapped up in cedar siding and a fresh coat of paint. But dreams have a way of cracking if you don't watch them close. A week before the big day, I came home from a late shift at the library where I worked part-time. My arms were full: grocery bags, a stack of RSVPs, a bottle of cheap wine to celebrate surviving wedding stress. The air smelled like pine and damp earth as I fumbled with my keys, already picturing Liam waiting inside with that grin I'd fallen for. I pushed the door open and the bag slipped from my hands, apples rolling across the hardwood like little red warnings. There, sprawled across my favorite armchair, the one I'd spent months saving up for, was Evelyn Carter, Liam's mother. She was 55, all sharp edges and sharper words, her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She didn't even glance up from her magazine as I stood there, frozen. The living room smelled like her perfume now, heavy and floral, drowning out the cedar I loved. A suitcase sat open by the coffee table, spilling sweaters and shoes like she'd already claimed the place. My place? Evelyn? My voice came out small, like a kid caught off guard. What are you doing here? She flipped a page, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Oh, Grace, don't look so surprised. Liam said this house is perfect for us. I figured I'd settle in early, save myself the hotel bill. I blinked, waiting for the punchline. Liam hadn't said a word about this. He'd been in Portland for a work thing, due back tomorrow, and I'd been counting the hours until I could collapse into his arms and laugh about how crazy wedding prep was. But this wasn't in the script. Where's Liam? I asked, setting the wine down before I dropped that too. He'll be here soon enough, she said, finally looking at me. Her eyes were cold, like she was sizing up something she didn't much like. He told me all about this little house your parents got you. Sweet of them, really. But you're joining our family now, dear. This place is practically ours, too. My stomach twisted. I loved Liam. God, I loved him. But his mother had always been a shadow in the background, hovering just close enough to make me uneasy. She'd flown in from Vancouver a month ago, supposedly to help with the wedding, but every call with her left me feeling smaller. Now here she was, planted in my home like she owned it, talking about our family like I was some add-on they'd decided to tolerate. I took a breath, steadying myself. Evelyn, I don't know what Liam told you, but this is my house. Mine. We didn't talk about you moving in. She laughed, a dry little sound that scraped my nerves. Oh, relax, Grace. It's not like I'm taking over, yet. Liam just thought it'd be easier this way. You know, with the wedding so close. Besides, you're busy. Someone's got to keep things running here. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in as her words sank deep. I glanced at the suitcase again, then at the kitchen counter, where my sketches for the reception layout still sat, untouched. This wasn't help. This was an invasion. And Liam, my Liam, had let it happen. I grabbed my phone, fingers shaking as I texted him. Your mom's here, in my house, what's going on? No reply came. The wine bottle stared at me from the table, tempting, but I didn't touch it. I needed a clear head for whatever came next. Evelyn flipped another page, humming to herself like nothing was wrong, but something was. Something big. I could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like the calm before a storm you can't outrun. Valentine's was supposed to be roses and vows, not this. Not her voice in my space, not her shadow over my life. I stepped outside, the cold biting my skin as I stared at the porch where Liam had promised me forever. The fairy tale I'd built in my head was fraying at the edges, and I didn't know how to stitch it back together. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not yet. The night air clung to me as I stood on the porch, my breath fogging in the Seattle chill. Inside, Evelyn was still flipping through that damn magazine, acting like she'd been here forever. My phone stayed silent, no text from Liam, no explanation, just the hum of betrayal buzzing in my ears. I wanted to march back in and demand answers, but my feet wouldn't move. The house I'd poured my heart into felt foreign now, like a stranger wearing a familiar face. I turned and walked to my car, the groceries still scattered on the floor inside. Let her deal with the apples. I drove to a diner a few miles away, the kind with sticky booths and coffee that tasted like regret. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Barb, slid a mug my way without asking. I stared into the black swirl, replaying Evelyn's words. This place is practically ours now. Ours. Like my home was a prize they'd won, not a gift my parents had sweated years to give me. I thought of Mom and Dad back in Toronto, how they'd beamed over Skype when I showed them the house. It's yours, Gracie, Dad had said, his voice thick. Build something beautiful there. And I'd tried. God, I'd tried. Liam's text finally came an hour later, short and spineless. Sorry, babe, Mom needed a place to crash. We'll talk tomorrow when I'm back. I read it 3 times, waiting for the punchline that never came. No, I should have asked. No, are you okay? Just a shrug in 10 words. My fingers hovered over the keys, a dozen replies fighting to get out. Angry ones, hurt ones, ones that begged him to see me. In the end, I wrote nothing. Barb refilled my coffee, her silence kinder than anything Liam could have said. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I crashed at a cheap motel, the hum of the heater keeping me company as I stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I'd fix this. Liam would get home, we'd talk, and he'd make it right. He had to. I clung to that hope like a lifeline, even as doubt gnawed at the edges. Morning broke gray and heavy, matching the weight in my chest. I drove back to the house, rehearsing what I'd say. This is my space, Liam. Ours, maybe, but not hers. I parked across the street, watching the curtains flutter in the kitchen window. My kitchen. Then I saw him, Liam, stepping out of a cab, his dark hair messy from travel. Relief hit me first, sharp and sweet, until I noticed the way he glanced back at the house, shoulders slumped like he was already defeated. I crossed the street, meeting him halfway. Hey, I said, voice softer than I meant it to be. He looked up, startled, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hey, Grace, you're early. Early? I laughed, but it came out jagged. Liam, your mom's in my house. She's acting like she owns it. What the hell's going on? He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. Look, I know it's weird. She showed up in Portland last night, said she couldn't afford a hotel. I didn't think she'd come straight here. I told her it was fine for a couple days. A couple days? My voice climbed. She's got a suitcase, Liam. She threw out my painting, the one from that art class we took together. And you didn't even ask me. His face fell, but he didn't fight back. I'm sorry. I didn't know she'd do that. Let's just go inside, okay? We'll figure it out. Inside, Evelyn was at the stove, frying eggs like she'd lived there for years. The smell hit me first, then the sight of my sketches, my wedding plans, shoved into a corner, replaced by her purse and a stack of mail. She glanced over her shoulder, smirking. Good, you're both here. Breakfast's almost ready. I ignored her, turning to Liam. We need to talk. Now. He nodded, but before we could move, Evelyn cut in. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Grace. Sit down. We're family now. Or we will be soon. Speaking of which, Liam mentioned the house title. Smart girl like you, you'll want to add his name to it, right? Protect what's his. The room tilted. I looked at Liam, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he just stared at the floor, hands stuffed in his pockets. My throat tightened. Is that what this is? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You told her to push me into signing over my house? No, he said too fast. I didn't. She just suggested it and I said we'd talk, that's all. That's all? I stepped closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. This is my home, Liam. My parents gave it to me, and you're letting her treat it like some bargaining chip. Evelyn laughed, flipping an egg with a flick of her wrist. Don't be selfish, dear. Marriage is about sharing. You're lucky Liam's so patient with you. Lucky. The word landed like a slap, but Liam didn't correct her. He didn't say a damn thing. I felt the walls closing in again, my sanctuary turning into a battleground. I grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the porch. Outside, now. He followed, reluctant, and we stood where he'd proposed less than a year ago. Rain tapped the roof above us, a steady rhythm against the chaos in my head. Tell me the truth, I said. Did you know she was coming? Did you tell her she could stay? He sighed, long and heavy. Not exactly. She called me in Portland, said she was broke and needed help. I thought it'd be fine for a bit. She's my mom, Grace. And I'm your fiancé, my voice broke raw and loud. You should have called me. You should have asked. Instead, you let her walk all over me, over us. I didn't mean to, he mumbled. Can't you just let it go? It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Those words echoed, hollowing out the space where my trust used to be. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who'd rather hide than fight for me. The Liam I'd loved was slipping away, replaced by this stranger who couldn't even stand up to his own mother. I turned back to the house, Evelyn's shadow moving behind the curtains. This wasn't fine. This wasn't temporary. And I wasn't letting it go. The rain picked up as I stood on the porch with Liam, drumming harder against the roof like it was trying to drown out the mess between us. His words, not a big deal, hung in the air, sharp and cold, cutting deeper than I'd expected. I wanted to shake him, to make him see what he'd done, but his eyes stayed fixed on the ground, avoiding mine like I was the one who'd let him down. Inside, Evelyn's humming drifted through the cracked door, a smug little tune that twisted the night. This wasn't my home anymore. Maybe it never had been. I drove away again that morning, tires splashing through puddles as I headed nowhere in particular. The motel wasn't an option. I couldn't hide forever. So I parked at a quiet overlook near Lake Washington, watching the water ripple under the storm. My phone buzzed with a half-hearted text from Liam. Let's talk later, okay? I'll fix this. Fix it. Like it was a leaky faucet, not a fracture splitting us apart. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat there, replaying every moment of the last 3 years, every laugh, every promise, and wondering how we'd ended up here. By nightfall, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't running anymore. That house was mine, and I'd fight for it even if Liam wouldn't. I drove back under a sky heavy with clouds, my resolve hardening with every mile. But when I pulled up, the porch light was off, and my key wouldn't turn in the lock. I jiggled it, then pounded on the door, rain soaking through my coat. Nothing. Then the curtains twitched, and Evelyn's face appeared, her smirk lit by the glow inside. "Grace, go home," she called through the glass, her voice muffled but dripping with triumph. "This isn't your place anymore." My blood ran cold. "Open the door, Evelyn, now." She cracked it just enough to lean out, her arms crossed. "Liam changed the locks, said it's for the best. You've been so dramatic lately. We need some space." "Liam's not even here," I shouted, stepping closer. "This is my house. You can't just—" She cut me off, her hand flashing out faster than I could react. The slap landed hard across my cheek, a sting that echoed in the silence of the night. I stumbled back, shock burning hotter than the pain. "Don't you dare raise your voice at me," she hissed. "This is my house now," Liam agrees. I pressed a hand to my face, the rain mixing with the heat of her mark. Then I saw him, Liam, stepping out from the shadows of the living room, his silhouette framed in the doorway. He'd come back early. He'd been there the whole time. My heart stopped, waiting for him to say something, to undo this nightmare. But he just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor like a kid caught stealing. "Liam?" My voice broke, pleading. "Tell her she's wrong. Tell her this is ours." He shifted, his mouth opening, then closing again. "Grace, maybe she's right. Things have been tense. Let's just cool off for a bit." Cool off like I was the problem, like I'd invited this war into my own home. The rain roared in my ears, but it couldn't drown out the truth crashing over me. He wasn't going to fight for me. He wasn't going to choose me. 3 years, a ring, a promise, under this same damn sky, and he stood there, letting his mother tear it all down. Something snapped inside me, a thread I'd been holding on to too long. I straightened, the sting on my cheek fading into a strange, steady calm. "You know what, Liam?" I said, my voice low but clear. "You've made your choice, and I've made mine. We're done." His head jerked up, eyes wide. "Grace, wait." "No," I stepped back, rain streaming down my face. "You don't get to wait me out of this. You let her slap me. You let her take my home. You don't get to fix this." Evelyn laughed, a sharp bark that grated against the storm. "Good riddance. You never belonged with us anyway." I ignored her, locking eyes with Liam one last time. He looked small, shrinking under the weight of his own silence. I turned to my car, pulled out my phone, and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "Hi. Yes, I need help. Someone's trespassing in my house. I own it, the deed's in my name. They've changed the locks and won't leave." The operator's voice was calm, grounding me as I gave the address. Liam called after me, his tone desperate now. "Grace, don't do this. We can talk." "Talk?" I spun around, rain blurring my vision. "You had your chance. You picked her. Live with it." Headlights cut through the dark as a patrol car rolled up minutes later. 2 officers stepped out, their boots splashing in the puddles. I explained everything: the house, the deed, Evelyn's invasion, Liam's betrayal. My voice shook, but I held it together, clinging to the facts like armor. Evelyn argued, her voice rising into a shrill protest, but the officers didn't budge. "Ma'am, if your name's not on the title, you need to leave. Now." She glared at me, venom in her eyes, but grabbed her suitcase and stormed to Liam's car. He followed, throwing me one last look, part guilt, part disbelief, before climbing in beside her. The engine roared to life, and they were gone, taillights fading into the wet night. I stood there, soaked to the bone, as the officers handed me a spare key they'd found inside. The house was quiet when I stepped back in, the air still thick with Evelyn's perfume. My cheek throbbed, my heart ached, but something else bloomed beneath it all. Relief. I sank onto the sofa, rain tapping the windows like a friend checking in. Tears came then, hot and fast, but they weren't for Liam. They were for me, for the fight I'd won, for the life I'd almost lost. The storm raged on outside, but I was still standing, and for the first time in weeks, I felt free. The rain didn't let up that night, a steady curtain washing away the chaos Evelyn and Liam had left behind. I sat on my sofa, until the first streaks of dawn crept through the windows, painting the room in soft gray. The house was mine again, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Evelyn's perfume lingered in the air, and every corner held a ghost. Liam's laugh by the kitchen counter, his hand brushing mine on the porch. 3 years of memories, tangled up in a space that now felt like a stranger's. I knew I couldn't stay. The next morning, I called a realtor. She was a brisk woman named Linda, with a voice like she'd seen it all. "You sure about this?" she asked when I told her I wanted to sell fast. "It's a cute place. Good bones." "It was," I said, running my fingers over a scratch on the wall where Liam and I had hung a mirror once. "But it's not mine anymore. Not really." She didn't push. The house went on the market that week and I took a loss. A few thousand less than my parents had paid. It stung watching strangers walk through with their measuring tapes and judgment, but I didn't care. That money wasn't a loss, it was a ticket out. I packed up what mattered. My clothes, my sketchbooks, the painting Evelyn hadn't managed to ruin, and drove south to Portland. A new city, a clean slate, a chance to breathe again. The first few weeks were a blur. I rented a tiny apartment above a coffee shop, the kind with creaky floors and windows that rattled in the wind. It wasn't much, but it was mine, paid for with the sale and a little savings I'd tucked away. I'd lie awake at night, the hum of the city filtering through the walls, and wonder if I'd made a mistake. Liam's face would flash in my mind, that last look he'd given me, guilt and panic all mixed up, and I'd feel the ache again, sharp and familiar. But then I'd get up, make tea in my chipped mug, and remind myself, I'd chosen me. For once, I'd chosen me. Time softened the edges. I found a job at an art supply store, surrounded by paints and brushes that called to a part of me I'd forgotten. On my days off, I'd sit by the Willamette River with my sketchbook, letting the water's rhythm guide my hand. Lines turned into shapes, shapes into stories. A woman standing tall against a storm, a house fading into mist. I hadn't drawn like that since college, since before Liam filled my world. It was like waking up after a long sleep, colors bleeding back into a life I'd let turn gray. One rainy afternoon, about a month after the move, my phone lit up with Liam's name. I almost didn't answer, my thumb hovering over the screen as the rain tapped a warning on the roof. But curiosity, or maybe masochism, won out. "Hello?" "Grace." His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept. I messed up. I'm so sorry." I waited, letting the silence stretch. He went on, words tumbling over each other. "Mom's gone back to Vancouver. I should have stopped her. I should have fought for you. Can we try again?" I closed my eyes, picturing him, the man I'd loved, the one who'd stood by while his mother tore me down. "No, Liam," I said, soft but firm. "You don't get it. I deserved more than a man who watches me fall. I still do." "Grace, please," he started, but I cut him off. "Goodbye, Liam." I hung up, my hands steady as I set the phone down. The rain outside picked up, a gentle roar that felt like applause. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. That chapter was closed, and I was the one who'd turned the page. Portland became my refuge. I saved up bit by bit and opened a small studio, just a corner space with big windows and walls I painted myself. I hung my sketches there, sold a few to locals who saw something in them. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough, more than enough. Every stroke of my brush was a promise, to myself, to the woman I was becoming. No one would take that from me again. Valentine's Day crept closer. my first since the breakup. I dreaded it at first, the thought of all those roses and heart-shaped lies mocking me from every storefront. But as the date loomed, I felt something shift. I wasn't the Grace who'd said yes under a rainy sky anymore. I wasn't the Grace who'd begged Liam to see her. I was someone new, scarred, sure, but stronger for it. The night before, I stood in my studio, staring at a canvas I'd finished. A woman walking away from a house, her back straight, her shadow long and unbroken. It was me, or the me I wanted to be. I smiled, a real one, the kind that starts in your chest and spreads slow. The house was gone, Liam was gone, but I was still here, and that was more than enough. I turned off the lights, the city glowing soft through the glass. Tomorrow, I'd face Valentine's my way. No dress, no ring, just a life I'd built from the ashes of what might have been. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what came next. Valentine's Day arrived in Portland with a quiet kind of beauty. No grand gestures, no over-the-top proposals, just a soft rain kissing the streets and a breeze carrying the smell of wet earth. I woke up early, the light filtering through my studio apartment's rattling windows, painting the room in shades of silver. For a moment I lay there, tracing the cracks in the ceiling, waiting for the ache I'd braced myself for. It didn't come. Instead, there was a stillness, a peace I hadn't felt in months, maybe ever. Today wasn't about what I'd lost, it was about what I'd found. I got up, pulled on my favorite sweater, the gray one with the frayed cuffs, and made coffee in my little kitchen. The mug warmed my hands as I stood by the window, watching couples stroll by with their red balloons and shy smiles. A year ago, I'd have envied them, picturing myself in a white dress, Liam's hand in mine. Now, I just sipped my coffee and smiled. They could have their fairy tales. I'd written my own story, and it was better than anything I'd dreamed back then. The day before, I'd invited a few friends over, not a big crowd, just people I'd met in Portland who'd become my soft place to land. There was Mia, the barista from the coffee shop downstairs with her quick laugh and endless stories, and Tom, an older guy from the art store who'd taken me under his wing like a gruff uncle. I'd told them no gifts, no fuss, just bring something to share and a willingness to sit through my terrible cooking. They'd laughed and agreed, and now the apartment smelled like Mia's cinnamon rolls and the chili I'd somehow managed not to burn. We gathered around my rickety table that night, the rain tapping a steady beat outside. Tom raised his beer, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "To Grace," he said, "for dodging a bullet and landing on her feet." "To Grace," Mia echoed, nudging me with her elbow. "And to never settling for less than you deserve." I laughed, the sound lighter than I'd expected. "I'll drink to that." We clinked our glasses, beer, wine, a mug of tea for me, and the room filled with warmth that had nothing to do with the food. This wasn't the Valentine's I'd planned a year ago, with its roses and vows, but it was mine, and it was enough. Later, after they'd gone and the dishes were stacked in the sink, I sat on my couch with a sketchbook in my lap. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, a gentle hush against the glass. I thought about everything that had brought me here, the house in Seattle, Evelyn's slap, Liam's silence. It still hurt sometimes, like a bruise you forget until you press it. But the pain wasn't the point anymore. The point was what came after. I'd spent so long chasing a love I thought would save me, bending myself to fit Liam's world, his family, his quiet compromises. I'd handed him my heart, my home, my trust, and he'd let it slip through his fingers. That night on the porch, when I'd walked away, I hadn't just left him. I'd left the version of me who thought love was enough on its own, the Grace who'd settle for half a promise, who'd beg to be seen. She was gone now, and in her place was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth. Didn't come with a ring. I flipped open my sketchbook, tracing the lines of that last painting, the woman walking away, her shadow stretching long and sure. It was me, But it was more than that. It was every woman who'd ever stood at a crossroads, who'd chosen herself when the easier path was to stay. I'd lost a house, a fiancé, a dream I'd clung to too tight, but I'd gained something bigger. Freedom, peace, a life that didn't need anyone else to complete it. This Valentine's, I wasn't mourning what might have been, I was celebrating what was. A tiny apartment with creaky floors, a studio full of my art, a heart that beat for me first. I'd learned the hard way that love isn't enough if it comes without respect, that sometimes the bravest vow you'll ever make is the one you make to yourself. Walking away from Liam wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning. I set the sketchbook down and crossed to the window, looking out at the city lights smudged by the rain. Portland glowed, soft and steady, a place that had caught me when I fell. I wondered about the people out there, the ones nursing their own heartbreaks, the ones who'd faced their own Evelyns and Liams. What had they done? Had they stayed, hoping for change that never came? Or had they walked away, like me, and found something better on the other side? I turned off the lights, the room settling into a quiet dark. "Here's to new beginnings," I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. "Mine, and maybe yours too," the rain answered, a soft patter that felt like a promise. Tomorrow was just another day, but tonight, I was whole, not because of who I'd loved, but because of who I'd become. And you listening out there, what about your story? Have you ever had to choose yourself over someone you thought you couldn't live without? What got you through? I'd love to hear it down in the comments or wherever you feel like sharing, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we're stronger than we think. And sometimes the best love we'll ever find is the one we give ourselves.